Welcome to the Restitutor Orbis channel. Our mainstream account tells us that in the earliest days of our civilization we built pyramids during the Bronze Age. After the Bronze Age, we slowly advanced to the time of the Roman Republic that eventually became the Roman Empire, and the sort of structures that we built changed radically. We advanced to building smaller structures that were not quite as geometrically precise as the earlier pyramids, and yet they're very fine structures with great domes and magnificent colossal forms to them that endure to this day. And let's also take time to appreciate the wondrous Roman roads, many of which that also continue to endure to this day. Everywhere we go around the land, we'll see the ruins of the previous civilization. And yes, that includes the United States and the Americas, even though it's called the New World. Although new as opposed to what is certainly a question of the day. Today we're going to examine the 5 eras theory. The channel originally started with the charter of examining numerous different theories. And you can go back and watch the video that's linked in the description of this video called The Grand Theories of Tartaria and the Old World, in which we explored the many different theories that could explain the existence of pre-existing civilizations that were not explained in the mainstream. Think about the aspect of a cemetery. You believe that a cemetery gives you validation that the history that you're told is accurate because every time someone you know passes away, they're buried in a cemetery with a date that's left on the tombstone. Therefore, older tombstones must be validation that what happened in the past historical account is accurate. Although would you be surprised to know that virtually every cemetery across the lands has been moved at some point in time for a variety of reasons. We have now advanced to building wondrous towers of glass and steel that cross the land. And yet, can we actually build these incredible pyramids that we did in the distant past during the Bronze Age? How does the mainstream account explain the construction of these pyramids? Indeed, we are derided for even questioning the account that we're given for how the pyramids were constructed. We are derided and told that it's merely a conspiracy theory. Yet at the same time, the mainstream tries to explain the pyramids with theories. In other words, they don't know for sure. But it's okay for them to come up with theories because their theories are validated by scientists, historians, archaeologists, and all the individuals with the appropriate credentials to do such things. So you look at the pyramids and you'll see that it's made up of many large stones that had to be moved. And they explain this by telling us that the quarries were nearby. They also have these wondrous images that we have that show human labor moving these great blocks. And then we have these beautiful animations that show us how they used a wonderful waterworks project to move these blocks and set them in place. And doesn't that illustration look great of those giant colossal people? And when you look at these illustrations and you have this wonderful account that tells you that water may have moved the blocks in place with human labor, it suddenly seems very believable, and you'll just accept it without asking questions. Of course, this image looks ridiculous. We could never build the pyramids like this today. So if we can't do it with human labor, and we base everything on this supposed representation from a governor of Egypt that existed 2,000 years before the year 0, or so we're told, and then it was some Greek individual who came up with a theory on how they moved the blocks using ramps, even though he was theorizing about an event that occurred 2,000 years before he was alive, and then this Greek individual is also 2,000 years before our current time, I don't see any issues with the mainstream account of the pyramids. Now, if you want a different theory, we're going to examine the 5 eras theory. The 5 eras theory examines the fact that there are civilizations that came before ours that we don't discuss, that the mainstream does not acknowledge. And the reason for that being is that because if you actually acknowledge the existence of other civilizations where people lived in a different fashion, then it completely detracts from your ability to maintain your control over the population. The eras that we talk about the most and we'll examine on the channel are the contemporary era, our current era, the 5th era, and the 4th era, or also known as the Tartarian era or the Monument era. These are the most dramatic eras to talk about, and we also have the most evidence. But we're also going to consider the foundation eras, the 1st through the 3rd eras. And we call them the foundation eras because they were the original foundations that both the 4th era and the 5th era were built on top of. And we can still see their remnants. Indeed, we speculate that the pyramids are actually the remnants of the 2nd era civilization, or the foundation era. And yet there are other examples of incredible geometric structures that endure. Consider what we have in the 5th era with our great cities of glass and steel, and yet something about them seems very disposable and uninspired. What's the primary form of architecture? We have nothing but wonderful brutalist architecture. Brutalist architecture, called as such because it is functional, and it's also cost-effective. What's truly intriguing to consider, though, about the prospect of brutalist architecture is how it's risen across the world, and its heyday was considered after World War II in both the United States and the Soviet Union. And despite the fact that these were two diametrically opposed ideologies and nations, for a variety of reasons, they somehow embraced the same type of architecture, supposedly at different times and for different reasons that happen to support their respective economic systems. Even in Pittsburgh, where we saw the beautiful Cathedral of Learning, we have this wonderful glass tower that we can look at and we can act like it really compares with the Cathedral of Learning. And then we have many other wondrous structures where great residences live in. It looks nice and rounded and cubed and very, very boring. Sometimes you have to remember, though, that there is inspired architecture in brutalist architecture. It looks like we have what appears to be some sort of broken down TIE fighter here. And what does it represent? I don't know. Looking at the rest of the architecture, you need go no further than consider the dystopian film A Clockwork Orange. A Clockwork Orange, which talked about how a society repressed and controlled an individual, and it used this architecture quite effectively to show how individuals were controlled and how ultimately the violence that was inflicted on others was all at the behest of the government. And if you pay attention to the subtext in the movie A Clockwork Orange, you'll see that the architecture plays no small part in representing that. And there's no doubt about it that brutalist architecture can certainly reflect a dystopian flavor to a society, if you will. Now, is this going a little too far? Is this being a little too harsh on brutalist architecture? It has its place, it's functional, and it's cheap. At least that's what we'll be told. Although there are conflicting accounts given as to why it was embraced. For example, you'll be told that in the Western world, the United States, brutalist architecture was embraced because it was cheaper, and there was a demand for residences. And then in the Soviet Union, or the so-called communist bloc at the time, you'll be told that brutalist architecture was embraced because it was all for the good of the state, and it was for allowing individuals and workers to all have the same standard of living. And as much as we believe both of these diametrically opposed ideologies embracing the exact same architecture as the main reason for why we have numerous examples of brutalist architecture, we see that it represents the Fifth Era. And in fact, many offshoots of what they used to call brutalist architecture still exist to this day. And you need look no further in the United States than a Holiday Inn Express or any of these newer modern hotels or residential areas, where you can find that it's not really dystopian living, it's merely common sense. It makes perfect sense. It's cheaper. And it's always good to have disposable buildings. It's also good to have buildings with the fine functional lines of brutalism in the background for when you're engaging on your individual walks for fun. But why is brutalist architecture considered something that's an advancement? For two reasons. One, we're told that it reflected the economic realities in the entire world from the 1950s to the 1970s. And two, we're just told that it's a lot more practical. We don't want to build architecture that has an artistic appeal to it. Practicality, cost savings, and being economically viable. That's what really matters. And when you have a lot of people that need housing, you're going to shove them in very block-like housing units that all look the same. And this will inspire people. And indeed, the actual housing units that were used to film A Clockwork Orange still have that same dystopian look to them in the present. Now, it's my opinion. Perhaps this is a utopian appearance to you. Perhaps you think that that beautiful Freedom Tower in New York City is an improvement over the structures that preceded it. We've looked at the skyline of New York City in the early 20th century. And tell me, is there a comparison? Do any of these many residential high-rises actually compare to the previous residences that we had all over the Western world and the Eastern world from the times past? We'll be told that this was merely a necessity, that this was done for the good of people, that this represented the will of the people, not just in the United States, but in the Soviet Union. Now let's look at the Art Deco question. Is Art Deco from the Fifth Era or the Fourth Era? Art Deco is very intriguing because it has conflicting accounts for what it really represents. It has conflicting accounts for what styles actually go into Art Deco. When we look at Art Deco, though, we see something very different than brutalist or postmodern. We see an architectural style that reflects artistic inspiration, something that reflects a civilization that genuinely cares about the structures that it's building, that the structures are supposed to have more of a function than just be utilitarian, as we're relentlessly told that brutalist architecture serves. We see a style and a beauty in these Art Deco buildings that seem to speak to the human spirit. When you look at these buildings, you can't help but be impressed, and you feel that a lot more effort was put into their exterior and interior designs. You actually see the fact that there is the true human spirit that's reflected in these buildings. And oftentimes people will try to convince you that these buildings were all easily built primarily in the United States during the 1920s, and you can even find a great example of one built in the Soviet Union in the 1940s to the early 1950s. Yet, looking at the Art Deco style, you can see that there is something about it that is always awe-inspiring. And it's very difficult to accept the explanation that all these buildings were built with these very wonderful and convincing construction photos that we have. And even though this was only about 100 years ago, it still falls in a very ambiguous time. Did our civilization build these buildings? Or are we simply told that they built these buildings? How much of a deception do we have with the actual timeline? And can we really validate or verify anything? Now, it's very interesting to me because since I've done many of these explorations and we've primarily looked at many cities in the United States, we've started to look at cities in Europe and in Asia, we always have the same explanation and always have the same things that you see in the comments. And I'm going to let you in on something. There's actually a comment somebody could make that would convince me over 90% that any one of these Art Deco buildings were built by our civilization. But it's quite fascinating that not a single person has ever made that comment. And it's really quite simple, and I'm not going to tell you what that comment is. I'll let you know if somebody makes the comment. But you can find an example of it in one of the videos concerning an Iowa exploration because somebody made a comment that very convincingly showed that the 801 Grand Building in Des Moines was built by our civilization. And yet there's so many questions that come up with these Art Deco buildings. They continue to show the aspect of the civilization that preceded ours. I believe that by and large, most of these structures are from the 4th era, or the Tartarian civilization that preceded our 5th era. And why do I think that? Because these buildings do reflect the style of what we would call the Old World. They have that artistic spirit, that inspiration in every single one of them. And it's not just on the exteriors of the buildings, it's also in the interior where you see how they reflect the once grandeur of civilization. A civilization that cared about the individual, not constantly being in a state of function or a state of misery, but being able to inspire the spirit on the inside. No doubt when you're in an Art Deco building as opposed to when you're in a brutalist architecture building, you can tell the difference. You can also compare and contrast how you feel when you stand outside an Art Deco building as opposed to a brutalist building. And when you see some of the examples of Art Deco, the explanation you'll be given from architects is that they had more of an artistic flair in the 1920s to incorporate all these incredible styles that even include Egyptian, strangely enough, because we do recall the civil courts building in St. Louis that we looked at that was modeled after the mausoleum of Helicanarsis, which supposedly doesn't have anything to do with Egypt, but it does. And that's according to the mainstream account. There's always these beautiful reliefs that also accompany Art Deco. The wondrous figures that you see depicted on the outside of the buildings. And these buildings have many different functions. Some are office buildings, some are municipal buildings, some are memorials, yet the style is reflected in the same. And while they try to tell us exactly what it's supposed to reflect, and of course they give us the hand wave explanation that the reason it reflects every civilization and culture across the world is because, of course, it incorporates every civilization and culture across the world. That's how you explain Art Deco. It's not because it's actually from a civilization that encompassed all the known lands. It's because somebody was trying to achieve cultural understanding in the 1920s, especially in the United States. The interiors of some of these buildings continue to inspire us. Now, why do I acknowledge the fact that some of these buildings may be questionable? Because we constantly run across the situation where we're told, we are assured in the same manner with repeated statements that many of these buildings, and here we look at the main building of the Moscow University, a questionable building, we're told that this individual, Joseph Stalin, was responsible for its construction. And once Joseph Stalin had passed on, then the Soviet Union completely embraced brutalist architecture. Indeed, it's an individual that we always explain it. Remember during the Kansas City exploration where we saw some very stunning Art Deco buildings, including the Power and Light building in the aptly named Power and Light District within Kansas City. I would be interested to see someone actually be able to build a building like this today. I would like to see someone build this very impressive theater that still endures with this very unique dome, again in Kansas City. Interesting patterns that we see in the windows, and of course the type of construction material that was used to establish the walls and the dome itself. And let's not forget the Kansas City Hall. The Kansas City Hall also being a stellar example of Art Deco. And where do you see it? You see it in the art reliefs, and you also see it in the walls of the building going all the way to the top. So you can prove that there is a skyscraper that's a lot more than just a functional building. You can see there are aspects of it that truly reflect a different civilization, unless we're to believe it's our own civilization. Kansas City has its own version of Joseph Stalin, Tom Pendergast. Tom Pendergast, who was a mafia and political machine organizer in Kansas City and supposedly responsible for the presidency of Harry S. Truman. Of course, it didn't save this particular individual from serving time in prison for tax evasion. So really, was Joseph Stalin and Tom Pendergast responsible for the Art Deco buildings, or were they just the people that we say are responsible? We have many photos of the construction of the Art Deco buildings, and supposedly we have many accounts. Although, oddly enough, no one seems to provide a first-person account. And now let's consider the Fourth Era proper. This is the era that we call the Tartarian era. This is the civilization that preceded ours. There was a hard reset that occurred in a time frame from 1750 to 1850, although it's hard to say for sure. We have wondrous examples of what the Tartarian civilization may have looked like. Very incredible architecture, stretching to the sky, various forms of producing power. We've explored it in great detail about how this pre-existing civilization managed to achieve a balance between both nature and the artificial implements of its civilization. It also managed to achieve the very elusive balance, for a time, between the individual and society. And that's something that our current civilization tends to go away from in every direction that you can imagine, especially given the fact that it oftentimes defaults to extreme polarizations and someone always having to be right and someone always having to be wrong. And you always have to embrace a belief now, and it's completely wrong to remain undecided about something. We'll still see examples of this Tartarian civilization even in some older images that we have, such as this image that may or may not have problems with it, of an airship docking with the Empire State Building. We also have other examples of airships docking with various towers. So is this really a brief technological fad according to our mainstream account? Or was this a real technological advancement that carried over from the Fourth Era civilization that had to be removed? We've looked at many examples of buildings that still stand to this day that we suspect are from this pre-existing civilization. Consider the Art Deco buildings that we looked at that are very likely from the Fourth Era civilization. We've also explored many libraries and municipal buildings in many cities, such as Terminal Tower in Cleveland. And many people will insist that they have numerous accounts, or because they worked a job in the building, that they can prove that it was constructed by our civilization, even though all we have are some very difficult to interpret images. And once again, we have, strangely enough, no first-hand accounts. Well, I understand the 1930s was a long time ago. And again, we have other images of this terminal tower. And many people will say that they just know, or they know someone who knows someone who knows someone, and that's what they'll say. And if that's good enough for you with the historical account, then by all means accept it. But yet you have many other structures that also seem to defy simple explanation by their incredible architectural style, and all supposedly built during the same time, such as the Masonic Temple in Detroit that we explored. Another wonder of the 1920s, when it seemed as though they built 75% of the buildings in every major city in the Midwest of the United States. We do have a construction photo of it, and once again we see that there are no issues with this construction photo. It is very convincing, and of course that's usually what you'll have when you explore these structures. Remember the wondrous interior that we looked at. And again, I believe this interior gives us true evidence of a pre-existing civilization that has been repurposed and used by the organizations in our current civilization. And here you look at this theater in the same structure, and again a very impressive and beautiful theater. Certainly there is nothing that we've built since the 1960s that remotely compares to this. This impressive structure in Cincinnati that will be told is an arch or waterworks, it is most certainly not a castle, because somebody says so. And in Cincinnati, where we have this impressive church from the 1840s next to the city hall. And of course, the explanation will be given is that we had those crafty Germans that could build in Greco-Roman style and lay out a wonderful church like this in the 1840s with very impressive columns and the roof that we've seen. And there's absolutely no question about this. You just accept it. Or you can ask questions, such as looking at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, and realize that perhaps all the explanations that were given for who was truly responsible for these structures is not as simple or as cut and dry as it seems. Indeed, looking at the Fulton County Prison in Atlanta, or near what would become Atlanta, we can see evidence of a different civilization. Don't even bother asking why you'd need a tower on a prison like that, because it makes perfect sense. And now we look at the Foundation eras, the third to the first era. Now the Foundation eras may not seem as dramatic as either the Tartarian era or the Contemporary era because we don't have as much direct evidence. But we still have a lot of direct evidence that indicates that there was an era that preceded the civilization that came before us. And this is in the many examples that we have of what we call star forts, or as this channel refers to them now, geometrically precise foundation structures. And the reason we call them geometrically precise foundation structures on this channel is because they are very geometrically precise. We can tell that these are artificial constructs. And in every major city, there is some sort of documentation that indicates that there is a geometrically precise foundation structure that surrounds the city. And quite impressively so, we can find it in cities across the land. In cities in the United States, in Germany, in Russia, the former Soviet Union, across many other lands. And the explanation will be given for these geometrically precise foundation structures that surround the entire city is because it was good practice. They were defensible. It's how you would defend against cannonballs. And yet, conversely, you can find some structures that had signs of these geometrically precise foundation structures, or the smaller star forts, as you will, during the United States Civil War, which, strangely enough, were overrun or overtaken by a direct tactical military assault. So it's very strange. Once again, it's the example of a conflicting account. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's fine. You have these maps, and yes, perhaps they were just drawn. And yet we do have actual imagery that shows that these geometrically precise foundation structures at that scale are quite real. There are many examples of them across the entire land. And you can find them around cities, around old fortresses, or at least what we're told are old fortresses or castles, as there are so many castles, since everybody seemed to be able to afford to build one during what were called medieval times. And yet you can see the geometrical precision, and you can see the amalgamation of artificial with the natural. And perhaps this is also the explanation for the large and long, numerous so-called sandbars that we have that run for miles, and in some cases 40 to 50 miles. And you can also see the precision within the remaining structures. There are so many examples of these geometrically precise foundation structures that we can't simply explain, surrounding small towns, surrounding cities, the remnants of what used to be walls. Yet it's integrated with the terrain. And we can also tell that there are buildings that were built on top of these structures in the past. And that's where we get the title the Foundation Era from. It was the third era that the foundation that our previous civilization, the Tartarian era, and then our current era, built on top of, or in lieu of. And when you can see this across the land, and you can see so many examples, it completely contradicts the mainstream account that we're given. Also the fact that it's overgrown and it's integrated with nature. Now, of course, people say, well, there's a reason for it. It was just built before, and it was done with the ability to build walls because there were so many skilled construction individuals during the Middle Ages all the way up to the 1700s. And building these forts, regardless of logistical challenges, were never an issue. In fact, logistics is one of the greatest aspects that's hand-waved away. Now, they explain it with the Egyptian pyramids by saying that the quarry was right there. Well, it doesn't matter if the quarry was right next to the pyramids, which they try to tell us or imply that it was. You still have to cut all those blocks. You still have to move all those blocks, and you still have to form the pyramids, much as you have to form the land and the artificial structures of this geometrically precise foundation structure that goes around what appears to be this settlement and this structure. So is it really that simple to explain, or is it just a matter of accepting what you're told because it's the path of least resistance? And oftentimes that's what we find ourselves doing. And if you assess that's what you need to do to achieve happiness in your life is simply to capitulate to the will of others, then so be it. The second era gives us the example of where we have the pyramids from, and it no doubt reached heights that we can only begin to dream of. Now we suspect that there are a few remnants of the second era. We're told by the very same mainstream account that tells us of how the pyramids were constructed that they once had even more beauty to them, that they once appeared to have a great outer structure. But also imagine if they had this ability to build pyramids, what could they have achieved and how many ubiquitous structures could they have built using the geometric precision of pyramids? You also have to think in a much larger scale too, because while people will try to say that we never achieved a great building scale, yet we're still able to conceive a larger building scale. In other words, imagine pyramids that would start to match the size of hills or even small mountains, and then integrate a technological component with them. Integrate the aspect of power resources. And when you look inside the existing pyramids that remain, you see a very complicated architecture that went into establishing them. And of course we're told, well, it's because it was a tomb and the pharaoh liked their pyramids and they wanted to have a very elaborate tomb. And the thought of rebellion because they were facing death never crossed anyone's minds. Well, except for a few select individuals. But what if it was very different? What if this was a civilization that existed in even more balance between the individual and the society, and it achieved even more balance between nature and the artificial? And what if what we refer to as the Mayan civilization was actually just a component of the second era civilization? What if all the descendants that came from it and its long timeline actually came from the second era? Think on this. Instead of this being a less advanced civilization, this was a far more advanced civilization. Again, it flies right in the face of what we're given from the mainstream account that provides us depictions such as this. And depictions such as this, even though no one will ever do a practical experiment to prove how possible this is, that will convince us that this was how the pyramids were built. But what if they had construction techniques that we have absolutely no knowledge of? The ability to produce construction materials that far exceed anything we can begin to imagine. And we're not even talking about the original Rossendale cement, or the Rossendale concrete as we called it, or the Roman concrete. We're talking about something even more advanced than that. And here we have the depiction that shows us what the original pyramids supposedly looked like. And there's no doubt that they had this level of grandeur. Perhaps they had even more grandeur. Maybe they were coated in something that looked like gold. We'll still certainly consider all the other theories that we have, even though the five eras theory seems to be quite solid, at least from our observations. The important thing is that we retain open minds. While we're visualizing what the previous eras, especially the foundation eras, may have appeared like, what we're going off of for our evidence is some of the foundation rocks that we have, many of the other impressive structures that no doubt existed in these previous civilizations. What we see remain are not the full structures in their glory. We see the smaller structures that have somehow survived the passage of time and at least 2, perhaps 3 resets. And something else I'll concede with this 5 eras theory. For all we know, there could have been many more eras. There could have been 10, there could have been 20, there could have been 30, or even 100. And another question might be, well, how exactly does other timelines fit into this 5 eras theory? Well, when you consider the fact that San Francisco is considered to be one of the most exquisite cities of our current civilization, and yet nothing about it even compares with what we had in the past. Finally, let's consider the first era. The first era seems to be the era that we have the greatest difficulty imagining. And the reason for that is because the first era, no doubt, reflected the greatest balance It's safe to say that a lot of what we have in our current civilization encourages us not to ever believe that there were buildings that were the size of mountains, even though we're told that in the future we'll envision buildings that are the size of mountains, and architects supposedly already have. Or did they derive this inspiration from something that existed in the past and was described in the past? Described in many different old accounts of structures that were so large that they actually exceeded the size of mountains. We even have the account of the Beacon of Progress, supposedly just a drawing, a sketch, a concept for an incredible monument that was going to be reflected in the Chicago World's Fair, along with many other wondrous structures. We also have the religious accounts of the great religions of the land that tell us of great cities and celestial kingdoms in the past. Are they really referring to the actual celestial kingdom? Or are they referring to cities that may have existed? Cities in the distant past that really were of a grander and greater glory than we can ever imagine. Because we had a civilization of individuals that had achieved balance between both their individual desires and the needs and wants of a society. You might look at rock faces such as this and you would think, no, it's merely a natural formation. Or perhaps it reflects some sort of old, large tree. And perhaps it does. However, there's another approach that you could say it reflects a once great and amazing structure that's been through 4 or 5 hard resets, or maybe more. The difficult thing about envisioning the first era is the fact that we've had many resets and it's been a long time. Now, how long is that exactly? The main question might be, how many years do I envision in these 5 eras total? Well, we just don't know, and I know that's not the answer that anybody would want, but that's the honest answer, because we talked about in the date paradox how we don't know how many years have passed. We don't know how many years are in each of these eras. 1,000 years? 5,000 years? 5 million years? Could the entire 5 eras only be 6,000 years? Or could it be many more, 600,000 years? Is it a millennial reign of only 1,000 years, or is it a millennial reign of 1,000 centuries? Or even a far greater amount of time? We just don't know. And the difficult thing with considering time is how quickly things can become obscured, where we're reliant on other people, governments, institutions that were told relentlessly by other historical authorities that were corrupt, that were, excuse the pun, evil. Evil in every way, shape, and form, and yet we're supposed to believe that they preserved an accurate account of history to hand down to us? Because even if you prescribe to the mindset that all of our current governments and civilizations are completely incorruptible and everything they do is for the good and represents the will of the people, regardless of national divisions that we're constantly given, how exactly can you accept the fact that previous civilizations and governments that existed handed us an honest account? I suppose what I'm saying is the 5 eras theory is the best way that we can visualize what may have come before. And I'm always open to revising it and reconsidering it. And as we continue our explorations, we're going to primarily consider the 5 eras theory, because it does seem to explain a lot of the inconsistencies that we have. Now, if you want to reference one particular publication, one particular guide, or what one certain researcher says, that's completely up to you. And I completely request that everybody in the comments tell me what your honest thoughts are. What do you believe? Where do you think the 5 eras fits into the actual history? Is it honest? Is it accurate? Or do we have other difficulties? Do we have other complexities that we need to consider within what the actual timeline is? The last thing I'm ever going to do, though, is simply give up and stop asking questions and stop exploring. Because we've already learned so much, and we've already learned to see the world in a very different way. And of course, there's going to be people, there'll even be institutions that'll tell us that we shouldn't see the world in this way. What did the collapse of the first era really look like? We can imagine it. We can believe it was brought about by some hard natural force, or maybe it was brought about by a natural force and the internal corruption of the people on a long enough timeline. It is indeed a recurring theme in virtually every cultural and religious account that we have in our modern era. Consider what was really lost in the past. And I think that's the greatest theme of this research going forward, and this is why this is a very exciting exploration that we continue. As we go forward, all these theories are just as valid as any other theory, and I don't really have any evidence that discounts any particular theory. Although I will admit it's very difficult to prove the theory that everything is just exactly as we're told it is, and history is exactly correct in every minute detail, even though we relentlessly discuss the problems with that. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this exploration of the 5 eras. Please like, comment, and subscribe. So, the time paradox, the recorder paradox, and historical revision. A lot of what guides this channel revolves around these 3 concepts. And what are these 3 concepts? Well, we'll start with the time paradox. Now, if you've been watching the channel, it was over a year ago that we released the exploration, the date paradox, or the time paradox. What year is it? Because you'll see it's clearly shown here on the thumbnail. It was 2023 when this was released. Is it really 2023? Is it currently 2024? The answer is, I don't know. I mean, do you know what year it is? I mean, are you confident in what year it is? How many different dating systems do we have? And how many different ways have we counted years over time? And why is that pertinent and relevant to what we do, especially with our historical explorations? And honestly, I'm asking right now, does anybody know what year it is? Anybody want to venture a guess? Are you confident that it's 2024? I mean, there's all kinds of historical conflicts on that one. Hey, Tracy, good to see you. Exactly, and it's one of those things that we tend to take for granted, and it's anybody and everybody. And one of the other questions that I'll run by you, and this is a good point here, Fairy Girl, we're definitely in a different year than the mainstream tells us. Can't say with impunity. Absolutely. But how many people embrace the fact that we can say with impunity? I had a feeling I was going to see 10 something. You know, I'm glad you bring that up, though. You know, whether you're venturing guesses there. Yeah, good one there, Brother Adam Bum. The 2112 Overture. Yeah, that's one of my favorite Rush songs, too. Hey, Chris, good to see you. But it's intriguing that it tends to be a 4-digit year, even though the mainstream loves to tell us how many years that we have. And so understanding and being aware of the fact that we really don't know what year it is critical to our understanding, because it's really the basic confidence trick. And if you think about it, who here in the entire land right now was alive to witness firsthand what we think of as the year 1899? Ah, yes, the secrets of forever time. And time functions just like distance. You can always impose more time and more distance when you need to explain something. So, great point on that one, Tracy. But there's more to it behind that, because time factors in with the when we look at the 5 W's behind anything and everything. And remember, we always look at the who, what, where, when, why. And then we ask the how. Although oftentimes the 5 W's are mixed up to confuse the how. What are the major indicators of truth? Well, here we have these images of city destruction, but yet I've imposed what the historical mainstream tells us happened with each of these photos. I mean, are they true? Or is it just a caption that went with them? Was this city destroyed by fire? Was this city destroyed by a random explosion? Was this city destroyed by the March of Sherman? So obviously it must be Atlanta, although there were many other cities in Georgia that were destroyed by Sherman, according to the mainstream account. And what about immigration? It all factors in, though. If we don't know what year it is, then how do we know exactly when these events occur? We have an idea, but how confident are we? And remember that question, was there anybody alive from 1899 who can tell us they witnessed these events firsthand? And of course, we focus on the 1800s because that's really the mystery century, as it were. But the 1900s is even more mysterious, especially the early 1900s, oddly enough. And yet we have people that lived through that. I always appreciate those comments where people tell me, well, my grandfather, my great-grandfather was alive during that time, so those events must have happened. You know, funny, I mean, you know, I talked to my grandfather a lot, and he did live through the early to mid-1900s, and you know, he could never tell me about any buildings or anything like that, but, you know, take it for what it is. Ah, thanks, Albie, I appreciate that. I don't even know what day it is most of the time. Yeah, that's kind of how it goes for me too, Chassis. Hey, my bailiwick zone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. Oh, there's a good one, Kathy. And a minor disparity right there. I mean, that's only 10 years difference, but you're right. There's different calendars, there's different dating systems. Ask somebody from China what year it is. Ask somebody from Israel what year it is. There's many different calendars and dating systems. And how many are we aware of? How many do we actively use? And then when you really want to throw confusion into this, imagine the fact that in the distant past, they were looking at different forms of dating. In other words, a season, or what we think of as a season, counted as a year. In some cultures, a month counted as a year. And then you have others with long count calendars, such as the Mayans. Now, did they really count a year the same way we did? We're assured that they did, but how do we know for certain? And now the recorder issue. So we talk about the time paradox, we understand the ambiguity of time, and now we go to the recorder paradox. So we have these professional historians, all these university omniscient know-it-alls, like unfortunately yours truly once used to be and now denies that, but the recorder paradox. So who's actually recording the events of history? Do historians record the events of history? These ruined cities always look like they've gone through a blitzkrieg. Yeah, blitzkrieg, carpet bombing, total saturation bombing. Yes, I use saturation loosely, but yes, it does look like there's all sorts of destruction. Does anybody know what film this image is from? And of course, I chose it very consciously. Ah, that's a good point there, Esma. Yes, January, February didn't originally exist. There were other months that were added too. The winners, yes, that's a good saying there, Peter, but, then you could ask the question, who are the winners? Yeah, the victor. The victors do. But was there really ever any conflict? At least conflict that we know of. I mean, what do we think of current conflicts? Do we have different victors? Ah, there you go. Yes, Marine. Yes, Doc Shelley. It's 1984. Do you know about the Chronovision? Well, let's come back to that, Albie. Let's come back to that. So, on 1984, this is actor John Hurt portraying the protagonist, Winston. Very fitting name, especially if you've looked at the recent. And I do keep up on the news headlines, although I'll admit I don't read too deep in the news. But anyways, you remember his job, Winston, the character in 1984. He was part of the Ministry of Truth, and what he did was he went through news articles and edited them to conform to the current nature of events. So what you had was a constant process of revision on all historical documents and all news, and that was his job. And remember that Winston was a member of the outer party. So really what we would think of in our society as the middle class. And channel members might recall our little author that we looked at a couple weeks ago who was going after the middle class, saying that they're the cause of all problems and they stole the American dream. Yes, very interesting novel. But in this particular story, whether you're talking 1984, the book, or any one of the numerous film versions, and they're all pretty good. I got to admit, though, the one they put out in 1984 was very, very fittingly dystopian. But he would edit the news. He would edit history. He would change pictures. He would change articles. He would change names. He would change affiliations and reported events. And this was in a constant process of revision. Or you could even say it's an ideological revolution that's occurring with every article he alters. Now, am I suggesting that there is a real life Winston that's out there that's changing documents and news? No, you don't need to see it. You don't need that. This is an extreme example, but the idea of it is important. It's important to understand that perhaps our history, our understanding of the past is a lot more malleable than we're led to believe. What are your thoughts on that? The AI has revised history. Yes, in some ways it has, and even references to the AI. He didn't die, but it was strongly implied he would die. Not to spoil it, but I guess you could say in a way he did die because, oh boy, did he really give in to what happened to him. Hey, Sky Sage, good to see you. Yes, like a fact checker and a wiki editor. Great example. Not quite to the same extremes, but we're informed that we have different news sources. We're informed that we have different nations with different purposes, different intentions, and so on and so forth. But do we? Oh, there you go. Yes. Great comment there, Robert. History is like a living document. I would even go so far as to say history is a living document. It's constantly being changed. And the reason I bring up the whole concept of who's actually recording history, the historians do not record history in the moment, do they? Whether it's a person who's an actual recorder, the job of recorder, or typically government official, whatever government official is recording history. And you might recall, hey Chadwick, good to see you. You might recall that in one of our earlier explorations in one of the Iowa counties, they admitted that the official county records were kept by a judge in a shoebox. So yes, your shoebox documents. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Indeed. Whose story? Well, I guess it depends who's telling it in the moment, right, Jamie? Quantum eraser, changing the past to change the future. Yeah, in a lot of respects, that's exactly what's happening. Hey, PJC West, good to see you as well. So moving on, I thought I would introduce this idea of historical revisionism, critical re-examination of historical facts with or without new evidence. Now, the concept of historical revisionism was argued quite extensively when I was still with the university. Because guess what? There's been a lot more historical revisionism, especially since the 2000s. And I don't think that's a controversial comment to make, because it seems to have accelerated. Now, is that to say it didn't happen in the 1900s? No, it happened in the 1900s. I guess you could say the process just seems to have been refined. And in a very insidious way, because it always seems like everyone's always acting in the nature of doing what is for the greater good, but then you have to ask the greater good of who. By the way, why can you do historical revision without new evidence? What would be a reason? What's an example of someone doing historical revision without new evidence? Good question. More on that later. Keep that thought in mind, though, because we're definitely going to look at it. Watch it in real time with the American media. Yeah. And now they've got the process down to where they can change it every day or every hour. Reverse course. Oh, we got something else to tell you. Reverse course. I saw the Catacomb of Paris and the Last Supper woke parody in the Paris Olympic ceremony. Isn't that weird? Yeah, I'm going to come back and take a look at that. There's weird stuff going on, although I'm under the mindset now that they're just throwing that into every opening Olympic ceremony because, they've got to obfuscate what they've already shown in the past. So. Hey, Polly, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Ah, yes. Great way to say it, too, Esma. Social issues. And oddly enough, that's been going on since the 1900s, and it's very easy to document that, or at least have a hint that that's what's going on, that they're constantly revising history in the name of social issues. Hey, Tara, good to see you. Aloha. Well, and good point on Wikipedia. Think about that, because prior to the advent of Wikipedia, everybody relied on their encyclopedias. Now, whether that was Encyclopedia Britannica or one of the Time Life series or whatever, you had your fixed books there, and that's what you would refer to, and that's what you'd go off of. But now you have a true living document. Referencing what Robert said earlier, you've got an online document that can very easily and subtly be changed. Hey, Sovereign, Invisible, and Traceable, thanks for joining us. Yes. And it really was like opening the tunnel. So, I have not seen the film one by one. I'll have to check it out, Jamie. Don't let me forget about that, so... But back on the concept of historical revisionism, it is an official policy within history departments. It is accepted that historical revision needs to happen. Now, how legitimate is it? Well, that's what we're going to discuss. Because some people believe that historical revisionism is the reinterpretation of a historical account or narrative based on actual facts and authenticated evidence. That's what we used to be told. So you had to have new facts and new evidence. You couldn't just change a historical account. But now you have what they call historical distortion, when historical accounts or narratives are changed to suit a quote-unquote personal agenda. Yeah, sure, it's a personal agenda. It involves disinformation and lies to change history. So does it really seem like someone is concerned about maintaining an objective historical account, or can someone really change a historical account to suit whatever point they want to make? Or maybe they have a purpose behind it. Maybe there's a reason to keep everyone confused, because what do we like to say when people are confused? They tend to defer to what more when they're confused? I think if you've been on the channel, you've heard me say this a few times. Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if we could just get the truth? I'm all about it too. but everybody's got to machine gun you for trying to get the truth or just the facts. I mean, what are the facts? Facts are what I say they are, and that's what a lot of people will tell you. They won't say it like that, but they'll come across with that kind of confidence. And that's one of the hardest things to look for. Exactly. Response is, you're crazy usually. Why are you even questioning it? And it's a good point, Bad Wolf, and that's what a lot of people will say. Yes, especially if you go off of the Thomas Hobbes mentality of it, because the book Leviathan, which I strongly recommend anybody who's looking to understand how governments operate in the fifth era or our current era, just read Leviathan. Thomas Hobbes lays it out, and he says it very clearly, what governments are really all about. It's no conspiracy. They need to have that control. Anarchy is bad. It's really bad. Yes, indeed. So it's important to understand, though, the difference of these ideas, because historical revisionism is something that's embraced and used by the mainstream, but then they still keep the idea open of historical distortion. So really, authority. Authority decides what's legitimate revision and what's distortion. Now, they do give you an idea of what are some of the impacts of revisionism on society. It erases marginalized voices. Oh, that's true. Distorts the truth. Absolutely true. Undermines democracy. Well, we know what country this one came from. You know, the country that loves to talk about democracy but hates to practice it. Oh, did I just say that out loud? Yeah, I did. And promotes intolerance. So, oddly enough, in this little diagram, we do see a lot of truth of the impact of revisionism or distortion or whatever you want to call it today on society. It does erase marginalized voices. It does distort the truth. It does promote intolerance, and it'll undermine any sort of confidence in government, whether you have a republic, a democracy, or I've been waiting for this one, a pseudo-republic or pseudo-democracy. Anyways. The Department of Bamboozlery. Yeah, that's probably a good way to put it too, Jamie. So, absolutely right, Sky Sage. It becomes very, very hard to decipher when truth is mixed with lies. And then even more insidiously, when you have verifiable truth that's mixed with lies, people can confirm that truth. And then they start to believe the lies because they confirm the truth. For example, I don't know, just shoving a foundation stone in a building that somebody clearly established a year, saying the building was built in 1887. Although anybody with eyes can see it was added later. Yes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, no doubt about it. Pride and ego distorts people's abilities. They have been lied to. I'm sorry. Pride and ego distorts people's ability to accept they have been lied to. Absolutely right, Brother Adam. And it's not just pride and ego. That plays a huge part in it, but it's also the desire to conform. Because the first thing we're socialized with is to concern ourselves with what other people care about concerning our activities. Yes, founded. Good one there, Brian. The general public not questioning history is a problem too big to overcome, it feels like, unfortunately. Well, it depends on your perspective. You know, I mean, are we looking at society, or are we looking at what we can do as individuals or a small group of individuals? Awareness does go a long way. Now, you know, we looking to fix society all in one stroke? No, that's not realistic, but we can definitely understand where we are as individuals, and then we can make a difference in our own lives. Hey, RB, good to see you. Conform, confirm, you know, and so many different C words that get bandied about quite a bit. Yes. Groupthink is very dirty, and I agree with that. And guess what? Groupthink can happen in anything. It can happen in any institution. It can even happen with a group of alternative researchers. Yes, I said it. You have to be careful. You have to be careful not to succumb to groupthink. The reality is, between 6 alternative researchers, they might have elements of the truth. But if you tend to revolve around one for whatever reason, or you think one's more influential, then suddenly, yes, it becomes, as Kathy says here, a hive mind, or as Sky Sage says, a mob mentality. So I think it's very important that it's a fine line. You know, I like to say it's a balance. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but that's the reality behind it. You balance your individual research or your individual inclinations with the necessary requirements of any group or society. But oddly enough, if you read Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, there is no balance. The government is everything. You will give your life to the government because you agreed to accept that government, you know, whether they conquered you or you voted for it, that's completely immaterial. And that's life, according to Thomas Hobbes anyway. So I still think Road Warrior is better than Thunderdome, so there. You know what? Yes, although I'll admit, I did like the fact that Thunderdome finished a story. I don't know what the heck Fury Road is trying to do, and now we got a prequel to a sequel, and don't worry, we'll get a sequel to a sequel that was a prequel. Gotta love modern movies, another good sign of the time, so there's a good comment. Accepting the responsibility that goes along with knowing for faith without works is dead. Once you know you're responsible to do what is right. Absolutely, and a great way to say it, too. Worse yet is the apathy. So many just don't care to know the truth. Well, if you've ever watched the TV show Sons of Anarchy, and no, I'm not broadcasting it, there's a great saying that comes from the main character's father when he's reading his journal. And he talks about how people yearn for the idea of freedom, but they don't really want to work for the idea of freedom. To be free requires a lot of hard work. It requires a lot of difficulty in accepting personal responsibility. And a lot of people will forfeit that just for the idea of comfort or the reality of comfort. They'll give up anything just not to make decisions. Well, who knows? And I'm not so much the person who likes to say non-player characters or NPCs, which is what that refers to. But it's an interesting way to look at things. I think they have basically an individual spectrum. Yeah, I know that word's been subverted too. Maybe I shouldn't use that. But every person has potential. How about that? And some individuals have more potential or have activated more potential to really understand themselves, to really awaken the individual on the inside, or as I like to say, achieve self-agency. And a lot of others don't, because they like to conform to, as Adam Baum says here, welfare, nanny state of mind. Someone else is going to make decisions. Someone else is going to do it for you. Or as Homer Simpson said in that episode of The Simpsons, Trash of the Titans, can't someone else do it? Well, yeah, there's actually a lot of that mentality. Now, no one will come out and say it, but that's how they act every day. Yes, the very classic example of cognitive dissonance, Sky Sage. Big Daddy Government and Alistair Cooke, if you remember the host of the original Masterpiece Theater way back in the day, he actually did a talk about that. Big Daddy's going to take care of everything. And we're going to do an exploration pretty soon where we actually talk about where that came about and was that part of ending the last reset or what? Hard to say, hard to know. 2020 showed me just how much people do not want real freedom and will love to take others' freedom away. Yeah, that's an unfortunate truth, RB. Although the other thing I'll say is that's always been the way it is. It's just it seemed like it had to be a little bit more wrapped up or a little bit more dressed up in the past. And now, it's no big deal. I have power, so I can enjoy exercising that power over others. All right, moving on. And our good old friend Ken Burns here. And we might recall that Ken Burns, in his Civil War series, he actually gets a lot of grief from historians. And I want to bring that up because he's acknowledged as a filmmaker, an entertainer, and a lot of legitimate historians. In fact, you even find writer Shelby Foote, whether you want to consider him a legitimate historian or not, criticizing Ken Burns about the fact that he believes he changed a lot of the theme of the U.S. Civil War in the eponymous series, The Civil War. And so why do I highlight Ken Burns? Because Ken Burns is someone who does reach a lot of people. His movies are seen by a lot of people. So do they influence the mindset? Is it part of the revision that's constantly occurring? And you could argue yes. I mean, just go back and look at the films about the Civil War, the United States Civil War I'm referring to here, and see how the perception of it changed from 1960 to 1980. I mean, very, very interesting. And oddly enough, look at how many photos suddenly got coughed out to the public when the Civil War in 1990 was released. Nobody had seen a lot of those photos. Of course, there's no combat photos, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means it's not likely it didn't happen as they told us, right? Ah, yes. Well, and every director's done it to some extent or changed the way to look at it. Boo Ken Burns. That's a good one, Kathy. Were you saying Boo Earns or Boo Ken Burns? I'm not sure. Good reference there. Yeah, reinforcing the narrative is really what it comes down to, or reinforcing what the perception is supposed to be in the day. And believe me, this guy has moved the needle quite a few times without fail. And then here's a great example. How we saw it, how it really happened, how other people saw it. Now, I'm going to break early for our 2-minute break because I really want you to think about this one and really take this to heart, because this could be any news article. This could be any title. This could be any event that's happened. But it's important. And it's important to be aware of this in terms of how your perception of this event can be affected. Because could there be an explanation behind each of these images that you see? Is there something more that's going on here than what you might think? Or is it really what it looks like? Is it an act of mercy? Is it an act of violence? Is it an act of control? Or is there something else going on? I will let you know that there is an official explanation for what you see in this image, and these are all the same images. Now there's difference with the colorization, there's difference with the appearance, but this actually relates back to a story and an image that came from the Vietnam conflict. Now in the United States, the Vietnam conflict was very controversial. It still is to this day, to even talk or think about it. And that's relatively recent history. And so there are people who did experience this conflict. And so why is it important to understand this for the recorder paradox and the historical revision? Because remember, the person that recorded this event is not the person who's going to interpret it historically in the future. So those are all important things to think about. The canteen had whiz in it. Yeah, are you referencing, what was it? I think it was season 3 of Game of Thrones there when they gave Jaime Lannister that. Yeah, I remember that scene too, Jamie. Reminds me of Anderson Cooper getting caught on his knees in water while he was filming live, saying it was up to his chest. Yeah, I still remember watching him when he went to Ramadi in Iraq, and there was an explosion that was probably about 10 miles away, and he very slowly ducked. That's my memory of good old Anderson there. But anyways. Hey, Miss Honeybee. Yes, I appreciate that. So let's just get that banner up there and go ahead and hit that like button. And we're going to go ahead and roll into our 2-minute break here. But while we're on our 2-minute break, just go ahead and look at this image. And I want you to try to interpret what really happened from this image, because this is oftentimes all we're left with. We're just left with an image. And a lot of times, they'll frame us by giving a little caption to it, but other times they won't. They'll just give an image. And why do they like to use images? Because there's many different dimensions to these images. So anyway, initial intermission, back in 2 minutes. All right, so we're back and looking at this interesting image here that we tend to get with any sort of conflict. So in any event, what's the difference between how we saw it? Well, what you have is you have uniformed military personnel here. How we saw it, it looks like it's just one individual who's about to face an imminent execution, or at least is being threatened by a weapon. But then how it really happened, you don't have that happening at all. And the actual account here is that this is an Allied soldier that's being treated by U.S. soldiers. Now, the reality is, yes, it's an Iraqi soldier who is being treated by U.S. Marines. This is from Operation Iraqi Freedom, as they called it. and he was just giving him some water in a canteen, which did happen. But there's more to this than what you just see in this image, because how other people saw it. Well, they just see the black and white image, and to them it's very black and white. And so, yes, there's a difference between seeing what really happened. And why do I use the coloring mentality? Because there's extremes. Everyone always seems to think that everything is all or nothing. Reality is never all or nothing. There's always multiple dimensions to this. You know, how other people saw it. Well, other people saw it as, yes, it's very clear cut. It's a U.S. soldier who's helping an Iraqi soldier who surrendered. Oh, this is how other people saw it. It's a U.S. soldier that was threatening to kill an Iraqi soldier who had surrendered or was helpless, disarmed. But in reality, they were just helping him out with some water and trying to keep him alive. So it's just one single event, though, that can have so many different dimensions to it. And then when you go forward in history, well, let's just hypothetically say some crazy things happen. The United States becomes seen as totally evil, and then, of course, this image gets pushed out. Then the United States becomes the forces for good, and it always shall be, then this image gets pushed out. Although now they've gotten a lot more complicated with it because they operate on multiple paradigms where the whole intent is to sow division. There's division in national respects, there's division in ethnic respects, and there's even division in social respects and every form of knowledge you can imagine. And why do they do that? Because again, it's confusion. Group identity is more important than individuality. Welcome to the 21st century. Now, of course, I have to throw in one image of Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe always seems to pop into explorations on this channel. Anybody know what film this is from? Speaking of strange military events. Snorted instead. Mountain Dew. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, yeah. And World War II turned out to be a much more dynamic conflict than we like to think. Ah, yes, right, all of ya. Platoon. Tom Berenger and Willem Dafoe, Staff Sergeant Barnes and Sergeant Elias. Oh, just you wait until we get to the Dr. Zaius exploration. That's going to be interesting. I worked in operations at the Seattle branch of a stock brokerage and lived through the crash of '87. I witnessed with my own eyes the reporter-photographer dumping several boxes of stock trade. Yes, indeed. And a lot of us witnessed a lot of things like that. But, of course, it's never captured. Nobody ever talks about it, do they? Until well after the fact. So, what's interesting about Platoon, and the reason I bring it up, is what a lot of people don't understand about Platoon. I mean, they understand it on reflection. But you'll find that some veterans really appreciate this movie. And I'm talking about Vietnam veterans. I'm not talking about other veterans. But Vietnam veterans that were there, it seems to go about half and half when you talk to them. Half of them appreciate the movie and the fact that it's really a microcosm, one platoon, for the entire conflict of Vietnam. But the other half don't appreciate it at all because you see some of the worst respects of what happened with certain service members over in Vietnam. You know, the war crimes thing, everything going on, randomly killing and terrorizing villagers, the whole rape, pillage, and murder, which was shown in this film. But then you contrast that, between the two sergeants, which kind of speak as the soul of the platoon. You've got a platoon leader, a lieutenant. It's completely ineffective and doesn't practice leadership whatsoever. You got a company commander who calls in fire on his own position when they're overrun, although granted, tactically, you'd say he didn't have any choice. But the reason why this film stays in our memory, though, is that it really shows the different dynamics of humanity. But on the other hand, is it really so one way or the other way? Is it so polarized? Or, as the photo showed, because it's a bad cliche, and I'm not going to say it, but, the coloring of the photo. There's a lot more dimensions that go into this, and it's not so clear-cut. And suddenly history is not so all or nothing. But are we told that it's all or nothing? Yeah, he sure did. Run through the jungle, no doubt about it. No, and, I think, Julia, the reason why the film resonated with people was that it really gave you an idea of what it was like to actually go walking through a jungle for hours on end. And it's not a very enjoyable experience, to say nothing of the events that are happening. Whether you're getting attacked by fire ants, you're watching your friends get killed, or you're watching innocent people get killed. And that's something the film really showed quite well. So these are all terrible, horrible things. And we know war is a terrible, horrible thing, and yet for some reason we just keep diving on into it. I mean, now in the United States, we like to say, well, hey, at least we're not engaged in any wars ourselves. We're just helping other people fight wars. So that's kind of okay. Now, the other film that I didn't show, yeah, maybe it was, who knows. The other film I didn't show about Vietnam, but I've talked about it, is Apocalypse Now. And there's a great line in Apocalypse Now that Captain Willard, Martin Sheen's character, says that I think is very applicable. And one of the things he says is, you cut someone in half with a machine gun and you give them a Band-Aid. And there's a lot of truth in that, especially when you look at how military operations go with the United States. Really anybody, but we'll say the United States because that's who's being talked about. Uniforms. Why are they a thing in war? Good question, RB. Very good question. And sometimes the uniforms often look a lot alike. In fact, quite frequently they do, especially in certain time frames. So I have read Hearts of Darkness. Wonderful book. And that's what motivated Apocalypse Now. So yeah, and maybe there's a reason why you have such a clear insight, Fairy Girl. I mean, there's a lot of things that these Hollywood movies try to push people in certain directions, and I think you can use them to kind of step back. Yeah, it does break both ways. Groupthink, dehumanize. Yep. And so many people miss that whole concept in Full Metal Jacket because everybody thinks that Gunnery Sergeant Hartman is ultimately cool, but nobody pays any attention to the fact that he's the one who gets the Full Metal Jacket through his chest and dies very unceremoniously by a recruit that he thought was pathetic and weak. And you know the company commander would cover that one up. Oh, yeah, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, he pushed him too hard. So, anyway. Miracle at Santa Ana. Yeah, that's a good one. Yes, it is. And it's very surreal, too. I think that's what they really captured in that film. So anyway, back onto our original, what we're talking about with time paradox and recorder paradox and historical revision. You can see it, though, in all these examples. And there's plenty of Vietnam veterans who were firsthand witnesses to what happened in Vietnam. But can any one of them tell you exactly what the war was all about or what was going on? If Sergeant Elias survived and you could talk to him today, could he tell you what was going on or what it was all about? He had his ideas. If Sergeant Barnes survived and he came through and, had a scar on the other side of his face, would he be able to tell you exactly what it was all about? So those are important things to remember. Even when you have firsthand accounts, does it really clear everything up? And you might remember this little image that I used where we looked at Union Station in Kansas City and we talked about different historical accounts. Really, if I have a picture, I can put any caption with it and I can really get you to believe anything. You believe what you're told. This becomes your reality. That's why I always push questioning on the channel. It's important to question things. And people get tired of it. And as you all mentioned earlier, what happens is they're just willing to go along with the mainstream narrative. It's easier. It's just easier to go along with it. Ah, yes, everyone does have their own lens. You're right, Robert. I've worked with Vietnam veterans, and most of their stories has to do with Agent Orange. Very true, Chassis, and oddly enough, no reference to Agent Orange in either one of those Vietnam movies, even though it played such a huge role. There was that one movie in the 1980s that was actually made by, Trauma Team Films, and it was the same production group that made Toxic Avenger. They actually made a very serious movie, and we've talked about it before, and that movie was called Combat Shock. That was about a Vietnam veteran who's trying to integrate in the 1980s in New York City, or at least one of the boroughs, and not succeeding. And his child is also a victim of Agent Orange, and then he's got another one coming. So, anyways, it just gives you that idea. There's a lot more to it, and yet one of the most essential events of Vietnam that affected the most veterans doesn't even get talked about in films. So again, make of that what you will. But that is absolute truth. Yep, Combat Shock. And no, I'm not going to recommend the movie, but it is a terrifying and brutal movie, and it's made on a shoestring budget. But yet they really conveyed the true horror of war, and then even more so, the real horror of genuine post-traumatic stress. Now, of course, that term gets thrown around, but what you really see it's coming from is that there are people that are trying to pull down this guy who's trying to reintegrate. So that's what the whole movie's about. Strategically transfer equipment to another location. Steal. Yes. Ever so true. And so this whole idea of historical revision, why does everyone refer to Tartaria in the Old World? And you might remember these are the major theories that we have. And so we'll go to the next point. Theories of existence. Now, what's reality? Because now that we've questioned time, we've questioned history, we've questioned record keeping, because remember, record keepers and historians are not the same person. What are the theories of existence? And you may remember this slide if you haven't seen it. It won't be the first time you've seen it in a while. But it talked about some of the major theories. History is not what we believe. The dates, years, and perception of events are altered from the objective truth. And we just established that they are altered. And the main theory of the channel, it's the 5 eras theory. It's another way of looking at what happened in history based on observations. But there are other ways to look at things. Now, how do you say that? Well, reality is solid. But the past has been altered. Our understanding of the past has been altered. So we have the 5 eras theory. And this is the main unified theory that we explore the most on the channel to explain Tartaria and the Old World. Mass sacrifices to make a small group of people lots of money. True, Julia. Although, if you have total control over the money supply, or you say how much money there is, what do you even need to do the sacrifices for if it's not for money? Another whole question. Yes, keep them confused and they'll argue forever. True enough. But that's why we examine that, the 5 eras theory. Are we living in a dream? Is it something else? I don't know. And then looking at the 5 eras theory, so breaking it down in the Foundation eras, the Tartarian Age, the Monument Dome era, and then the Contemporary era. Now, I'll just run through this real quick because the 5 eras theory, we've talked about it, you're relatively familiar with it, and if not, you can certainly go back and watch that video. But the Foundation eras, the earlier civilizations of humanity, which are referred to in many different documents, even official history, but then also in the Bible, legend, other sources. There were civilizations before us. How great were they? What kind of heights did they reach? Well, according to legends, they reached quite high. And so it goes along with the concept, the main component of our theory is that we've lost much capability. Our longevity in life, our creativity, our inspiration, our self-reliance. The Tartarian era, that's merely a name of tribute, because really, you can call it whatever era you want to, the era that preceded ours. But most of the remaining architecture we suspect is from that civilization. But we have Foundation eras, the star forts, the great retaining walls, the vast basements and underground complexes that we have that are below the buildings. And those are certifiable, observable, and repeatable on exploration facts. Then you have the Contemporary era, last 170 years. Now, is it really 170 years? I don't know. Was it around 1850? I don't know. Could have been around what we think of as 1930 for all we know. Keep that in mind. But photos, accounts, history, relocations of people, asylums of all types, all the remaining buildings are repurposed, and it's based on illusions of achievement. And you can see a picture of those illusions of achievement. Because what do we like to tout? Well, we like to tout about all the things that we did. Yes. And a good way to look at it, too. Atlantis was about the first most advanced civilizations. And no doubt, Chassis, it's a reference to that, because all the references to Atlantis do indicate that. And I like to say, one of the terms that I have, or one of the sayings I have, is that Atlantis is something that existed in the 1900s. Atlantis was Tartaria in the 20th century. Same thing. You're referring to the same thing, a previous civilization. Although I suspect that there were more, and they had more capability than we realize. But could there be something else behind it? Yes, reality could be a simulation, and anything is possible in the simulation. Now, you might remember this is the original 5 eras timeline that I had with the Golden Age and the Tartarian Age and Contemporary Age and breaking it down into different eras. But we refined this. We moved on from it. And it might be possible that in the distant past, things were very different, that we had mega flora and fauna that existed, that this was a giant tree, that these were gigantic animals, gigantic, colossal people even. We just don't know. It's a theory. And it could have been in the very early eras, what we think of as the first or second era. That's the beauty about the 5 eras theory. It does make room for all these things to be possible. Now, it could be that, yes, this is merely just an old rock face. It's not a volcanic core. I always found that a little interesting. These aren't really the trunks of old trees, but maybe they are. Maybe these aren't the life forms of gigantic creatures in the past, but maybe they are. The 5 eras theory enables this to be encompassed. However, it could be because it's a simulation, because you're trying to figure out, well, what are the rules? Yeah, that's true. Or like that one film, Fantastic Planet. What is it built on? Yeah, that's a good question. Southeast Queensland is littered with ruined megastructures. Yep. And you'll find them all over the place, and you'll walk all over them and you won't even think twice of them. I didn't last very long, Robert. I mean, I try to make it look like it was this bold, dramatic struggle. It really wasn't. Once I started going against it, I mean, I couldn't say what I was supposed to say anymore. But anyway, whether it's 5 eras or it's a simulation, because, while I think it's not as likely it's a simulation, there are signs that it could be a simulation. Well, thanks, RB. I appreciate that. And so, whether it's a simulation or whether it's real, these are all things that we need to keep in mind, because these are all possibilities. And I always keep all these possibilities in mind every exploration. And I do find the simulation theory quite interesting. We have explored it. And why do you have Mandela effects? And I've had personal Mandela effects, and they don't apply to other people. There are some that do apply to other people. Fruit of the Loom, anybody? Where's the cornucopia? I don't know. And even talking about a yellow sun or a white sun. Now, you'll have people out there that'll relentlessly try to convince you that it's all just a giant psyop. And you know what? That may be true. But the problem is there's too many individual examples of the Mandela effect to ignore. You can't ignore it. There's got to be some other explanation. So could it be a simulation? Or could it just be the reality doesn't operate perfectly? I know Matt over at Quantum of Conscience, he likes to call them reality breakdowns. And I think it's a great term because it does encompass what's going on, whether we're in an actual reality or a simulation. Well, what's the difference between the reality and the simulation? That's another discussion. But it is something I actively consider, that we may be in a simulation. And it didn't exist. Maybe so, Chassis. No, I can see you, Texas. I can see you. You are there. Gotcha. Loud and clear. Or at least I can see your words just fine. No, very good point there, Paulie. Yes, a simulation is always a copy of something. But it's more than just a simulation. It could just be that reality is fluid. Now, is that because it's a dream? Well, it's a possibility. And, we did explore that to various degrees of success. Or is it because there's a lot more control over the reality that we're not aware of for whatever reason? Quantum physics is right with different dimensions. Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of the baseline aspects of it, Fairy Girl. I really do. Oh, Adam, once again, brother, I swear you're reading my mind because you're jumping ahead here. Inception, yes. And Inception really showed a lot of these ideas. So, simulation, reality's fluid, we're all in a dream. You can bend it, like in the film Inception. You can run down Times Square, like Tom Cruise did, and get into your Ferrari, even though you actually have a Mustang. So consider all inconsistencies at once. Anything is possible and changes without warning. This includes the rules of physics. Yes, total malleability. Absolutely right. No, so true, Ronnie. We don't know. We don't know. We've got hints. We've got clues. Hey, Donna Marie, good to see you. Yeah, I know. And a lot of people don't like Tom Cruise, but it is an example, though, of the film that really encompassed how reality could be a lot more broken down than we realize and why it may be. So, hey, Leighton, have you considered the possibility of the reset being caused by the Carrington event of the 1859? Yes, I have. I don't think, though, that the Carrington event was actually the reset itself. I think observations of it were from the remnants. But again, we don't know. What's the year 1859? I don't know. I mean, but I don't think it's an all or nothing. Yes, the Carrington event, it happened, it didn't happen. I mean, you've also got the year without the summer. You've got all kinds of questionable things going on in that time frame. So it's really hard to say. But the problem, if you're trying to determine if reality is a dream or a simulation, you do notice these inconsistencies. You do realize that there are things that don't make a lot of sense. So how do I explain it? Well, is it a simulation that's broken? Is it a reality that's fluid? Not really sure. And then, of course, I'm sure the most popular one, and I do keep it in my mind. Reality is solid, the mainstream is more or less correct, and history happened exactly as stated. Now, why do I keep that on the table? Because it's always possible, and I can't rule out the possibility, but I can certainly rule out the likelihood. Because for members of the channel, reality can be both a simulation and a simulation. Very true, Donna. And it can get a lot more, or Donna Marie, I'm sorry. It can get a lot more complicated than that. I mean, I'm keeping it very surface level in this exploration because I'm really just introducing the concepts that we do keep in mind as we do the explorations. That's the whole intent here. So, why do you think there's a lack of justice now in the world? Well, I think there's always been a lack of justice. It's just it's accelerated a little bit more, and now they can be a little bit more obvious about it. Ah, yes, Occam's razor. And you know what's cool about Occam's razor, Brother Adam, is that it can cut both ways. The simplest explanation can be the explanation, but the complex explanation that nobody wants to consider, that could be the explanation as well. So does Occam's razor really provide an answer, or is it just a way of sending minds a certain direction? I'll leave that to you to answer, all of you. So anyway, but yes, I know the likelihood of the mainstream being correct diminishes, as I like to say, with every exploration. You know, what's the media telling us today? Well, it's completely different than what they told us yesterday about anything and everything, so can't trust them. Ulysses S. Grant, he was a great general in the United States Civil War. His presidency left a lot to be desired. Of course, now historical revisionism, and it is damn well historical revisionism, is changing Grant's presidency. Oh, he wasn't a corrupt president. He just had some poor cabinet members. But, you know, he meant well. He was a two-termer. He was a great president. I mean, did he even exist in the way that we think that he did? Well, don't ask those questions, okay? Look, this is Ulysses S. Grant. Clearly he existed. Now, there was a picture of some guy here wearing stars on his shoulders. Could he have been somebody important? Was it the same guy? Yeah, sure. Could he have been some commander that was rolling down what was really happening in what we think of as the United States at that time? Absolutely. Still no combat photos, but that's not to say combat wasn't happening. Probably just wasn't happening the way that we think of it as. And then, of course, my favorite, the Baker shot from Operation Crossroads in 1946. Yeah, you know, take a look at this video footage. I'm not going to tell you what to think about it, but if you get the chance, just watch the video footage of the Baker shot from Operation Crossroads and tell me what you think. Please do it in the comments, though. But, you know, main components of this theory, you can just research anything on Google, Wiki, newsfeed, sports, all you experience. Everything is just as they tell us. Even though I can prove it to you every single day, it's not. It changes depending on the day, doesn't it? There are no planets. They are wandering stars. Ah, lovely comment. Knowing is void of doubt. This is very true, Miss Honeybee. And it goes down to a lot of people needing to know. We need to have answers, so I'll just accept whatever answers I can get. Beat bop bop programming. Yeah, pretty much. Just march to the tune of the drum, right? So anyways. But the main issue I have, though, with the mainstream being correct, I think it's correct in some places. I really do. There are elements of it that are correct. So that's the other reason why I keep it on the table. But do I think it's painting the whole picture? Is it telling us what happened in totality? No, not even close. We need reason, and people will believe what is comfortable. Unfortunately, Vaughn, that's absolutely right. And it goes back to the old saying that people don't like to make decisions. People like to empower others to do that. They just want to be comfortable. Life just wants to be easy. Now, is that all of us? What you got here, Starline? The holographic universe. Reality is malleable. And that could be a distinct possibility as well. And especially if you look into Gnosticism, which a lot of people will deride, there's elements of that. Or watch the John Carpenter film, Prince of Darkness. Anyway, so we'll move on. Courage and imagination. And the only reason I share this, and yes, these are two stills from one of my favorite films, the original Clash of the Titans. Don't get me started on the remake. I'm not going to get derailed with that. But courage, the ability to do something that frightens one. And yet people have different kinds of courage, but oftentimes courage can be subverted to do something terrible that you wouldn't do normally. And imagination, the faculty or action of forming new ideas. Now, the reason I bring both these up is that these are two concepts, these are two traits that in a lot of ways one's been subverted. So courage has been institutionalized in a lot of ways. You don't have individual courage anymore. And imagination. I don't think it's much argument to say that imagination has been deprived in this century. Quite a lot. And how can I prove that? Remakes, remixes, reimaginings, even the word itself. Add an S and you got a sequel or a remake or something. Hey, just think, in 2040 we'll have the film Twisters. Just wait till you see that. You know, Glenn Powell can come back and make the cameo appearance. Sorry, I just had to throw that one in there. Cavemen are real. Some have creative minds like humans, but cavemen are like parrots. Interesting. Nope, nothing new under the sun, but they always try to convince us that it is new under the sun, don't they? Especially this particular century. Why? Who knows? Now, probably one of the most important parts of this portion. I want to really get down to what are the main guidelines of the channel. And I don't impose a lot of guidelines or anything like that. What I like to do is I like to operate, though, with these set of boundaries. I seek to explore all these theories, prove or disprove them. I'm doing that actively every single exploration. So if you're really looking for my method, this is the one time where I'm going to explain it. And then people who come to the channel and don't understand how we're doing things, I'm going to refer them to this video or this live stream. So we seek to explore these theories, prove and disprove them. Always maintain objectivity. And you know what? I don't always maintain objectivity. I've got my biases. I'm a human being. I love the Iowa State Capitol. Okay, I'm not going to lie about it. But are there other structures out there that are more impressive, more beautiful, harder to explain? Absolutely. I mean, really, if I was living in Italy, you know what it would have been. It would have been the Florence Cathedral. Darn it. But I like the Iowa State Capitol, and it's good to have a baseline. But maintain objectivity. That's why I like talking to other people. That's why I like you expressing your opinion to me. It helps me maintain objectivity. And hopefully talking to each other, we maintain objectivity together. Reveal and share details of the land. There's a lot of things that we don't see. For example, in Dubuque, Iowa, a lot of people don't even realize there's a giant retaining wall with huge limestone blocks, or at least what we're informed is limestone blocks. I question that. Just one example. Encourage you all to seek your own answers. This is one of the most important ones. Because it's okay that you see things differently. It's okay that 10 of you out there might think we're in a simulation. It's okay that 50 of you out there embrace the 5 eras theory. It's okay that there's 10 of you out there that think the mainstream is correct. Because that's how we're actually going to seek our overall answers, is by being honest within ourselves and sharing all that information. That's how we keep asking questions, and that's how we find the truth. And no, it's not easy. It's really hard. But that's what gives us the challenge that we need. And this is the approach of the channel in a nutshell. I know that I know nothing or not enough. So true, Polly. So true. So yes, I know that comes back from my own personal history, that there's a method to my madness. This is the method to my madness, and this is how I operate in every exploration. So I don't even consider it healthy competition. I don't care about competition. Just like all of you, I want to figure out what's going on. It's that simple. It was the best Mad Max film, okay? It was. But anyway, so this is the method behind the channel. And that's what's evolved into the current 5 eras theory. And pretty much every exploration that I do, everything is put within the 5 eras theory. Now, the 5 eras theory does operate under theory number 1, that there is an objective reality, but there are glitches to it, or there are areas where it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so you can encompass most of everything by explaining that some of the things that we see are from the Foundation eras, whether it's the megaflora, the megafauna, the gigantic buildings, the great tree stumps, the very large animals that might have been colossal beyond our imagination. Totally possible in the first era, maybe even the second era. But then in the third and fourth era, we do actually see remnants that are out there that are recognizable to us. Now, for example, if you saw the Dubuque exploration, I believe that the retaining walls are something left over from the third era. I believe that the star forts are something left over from the third era. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. And then the fourth era is most of the structures that we still see, whether it's a state capitol, a church, a cathedral, or all the other repurposings that we have for those buildings. And then when our contemporary era. So all the explorations fall under those broad guidelines. Now, is that to say that I don't consider it's a simulation, it's a broken reality, there's some entirely other explanation? Absolutely. And yes, I do consider that the mainstream may be correct. In fact, I tend to start every exploration by saying this is what the mainstream tells us, and then we start looking at it and examining it. So that's the real approach behind the channel, but this 5 eras theory is the main theory where you have Tartaria and the old world. And we'll continue to evolve it as we go. Oh, thank you, Sooner West. And you know what? And you might be getting that airship a little bit sooner, so I appreciate it. Half-buried windows is the only proof we have that started this whole mud flood movement. We have the right to know, but no one dared to ask. So true, Noah. So true. A beautiful land of creativity instead of competition like today. And perhaps a world where the individual was balanced with society, where you could actually attend to the needs of the individual, but not undermine the society in doing so. Okay, but it better be a Ford Falcon. Sorry, I get more Mad Max fans all the time. So anyway, that's the entire concept of how the channel operates. So we're going to take one final 2-minute break, and then what I'm going to do is show you some of the images and some of the most striking buildings that we've looked at over the past year. And then I'm going to highlight some of the explorations that I think are some of the best explorations on the channel. So appreciate everyone being here. Please hit that like button. And I hope that this is giving you an idea of how the channel operates in every exploration. These are basically the very loose guidelines that I operate by. But I'm not a fan of imposing more guidelines, because my concern is if you impose too much control on things, you lose the creativity and the imagination aspects. And those are very important to understand and connect with the past, especially when we've been intentionally disconnected from the past. So hit that like button, and we will be back in exactly 2 minutes. Thank you. All right, we are back, and I just wanted to share this all with you for those of you who have come on in to take a look at the unified theory of Tartaria in the old world. There's actually one sentence that somebody could say, anybody could say this sentence, that would convince me about any building, past or account. I guess you could say it's my idea totem. And the truth is, no one's ever come close to saying this. I mean, they could say it in a comment, they could say it anywhere in the chat, when, whether I'm looking at a building, doing an exploration, but nobody said it. Now, I have heard it in the past, but I will admit I've never heard it in the 2000s. So, anyway, yes, there is something anybody could say that would convince me that they knew a building was built, they know of a particular past or account. but nobody's ever said it. And if you ever watched the film Inception, you might remember they have their totems, whether it's a spinning top, such as this, or the loaded die. In other words, you're able to discern reality because you know how this object is going to act. So, for example, the one character played by, what was his name? Joseph Gordon-Levitt, if I'm remembering the name properly, he had the loaded die, and he knew it would always land on 6. But you can't let anybody else touch your totem because then they could alter the reality of it. So therefore, I can't tell you exactly what that sentence is. I'm just making you aware that if I do hear it, I will certainly share it with all of you. I haven't heard it yet. So anyway. And then, of course, my own little personal Mandela effect. I go back to the the Final Battle miniseries. I do not remember this cute little puppet alien that made gurgly sounds. I remember a very terrifying apparition that was about 3 seconds in screen time long, and it was silent. And it scared me. It really scared me. This doesn't scare me. I mean, this kind of gives me something that, yeah, you know, it looks like a Cabbage Patch that went through the blender and the microwave a few times. And the gurgly sound just makes it kind of funny. But anyway, just thought I'd share that because you might recall. Ghoulies. No, that was a pretty interesting film too, though. It does look like a ghoulie, doesn't it? Yeah, that's okay, Kathy. There's a lot of direct ideas in V, and then the original miniseries changes from the Final Battle quite a bit because they punted off the original producer who had the idea. So, yeah, maybe it was just that, desensitized. I don't know. So, anyway, but moving on. Wanted to take a look at certain structures, though, that kind of pound out a little bit of what we're looking at in the 5 eras. Now, this is the Hormel plant, the original Hormel plant, which produces Spam, if you're familiar with it. This one was built in the 1890s, very much an old world structure, and it was in operation until the 1970s. And you can see it from a couple different images. Here's where they're tearing it down. Quite an impressive compound, though, for the 1890s. And apparently the workers, and you can still talk to quite a few of them in Austin, Minnesota, where this is located, they'll tell you it was a very safe facility, at least the old one was. And you can see in certain images it's a lot more impressive than first look would give you the impression of. So George Hormel packing plant. And there were several labor issues and so forth with it. But then they replaced it with this nice modern tin aluminum thing in 1980. Oddly enough, this would lead to a series of strikes. Now, history records that these strikes were about pay changes in union contract negotiations, but one of the key points was the fact that the safety level had decreased in the new facility. It wasn't as safe as the old world facility. So who would have thought that? But anyway, just an example. Yeah, sometimes you can have stupid ideas going around and just go around in your ATV in a Star Trek film. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Yeah, I always thought that Argo was ridiculous. This is the county courthouse in Freeborn County in Minnesota. And you can see very much an old world building. This is in the town of Albert Lea, which is the county seat. It's right next door to Moore County. Still don't know how it's pronounced in Minnesota. But yeah, very nice courthouse built in the 1880s. And you can see what it looks like today. Ah, yes, we had to take down that clock tower for reasons unknown. Tesla car. Oh, yeah, good one. Eating raw. Oh, gosh. Oh, boy, where has this conversation gone? Albert Lea, great singer. Yeah, yep. Yeah, exactly. They totally defaced it. Although one thing I'll share with you, when you look closely here, so this new extension here, they've tried to replicate the appearance, but I think you can look closely enough. So you can see this is facading. This is just concrete that's made to look like what they'll tell us is limestone, redstone, or whatever. But you go and you knock on this, so knock on the new stuff and then knock on the old stuff. Huge difference, even with what you think of as bricks. So I'll give Freeborn County and Albert Lea a little credit. They at least copied it in visual appearance, but you can tell the difference between the old original structure, and you can tell they had like a little factory power plant over here with a nice big smokestack, and then the new one. So just interesting things to look at, some of the explorations that we do. Yep, defaced, brought down. We do try. Yeah, we do. And this is just a classic example of it. Refaced humanity. That's a good way to look at it, too. Yeah, I think so. And, what we're told are rock or stones really wasn't rock or stones. I mean, look, it's still holding up. It's still beautiful. And it's still essentially indestructible unless something happened. I mean, maybe that's why they pulled the clock tower down. Don't know. They had to take the clock tower down just for safety. Yeah. Or they'll say that, there were animals in it. It was inhabited by bats and we can't have that. We don't need a clock tower anymore. What do we need a clock tower in the 1880s? Everybody had pocket watches, right? Especially if you were working on the railroad. But, everyone will come up with explanations and there you go. Then one of my favorites, so going back to Austin, Minnesota, where the Hormel plant is, they had a very lovely courthouse in Mower County. Yep, makes a lot of sense. Just incredible. And, it's just a postcard. It's not a real image, right? Looking back to last week's exploration. Oh, but they do have some images of it, although it looks like they're trying to hide it here. I mean, why would you even put this out here? Strange. Well, you can see the cool dome and tower. That's very unique. But then you do have some pictures that show you that this thing really existed. And of course, they brought it down in 1960 with urban renewal going on. Now, you might remember this. This is the Cathedral of Transfiguration. So this is up in Canada. And why am I featuring a building that was made in the 1980s? Because I think this is one of the buildings, and this was also featured prominently in the film In the Mouth of Madness, another one of my favorite John Carpenter films. And it's one of those things that gives the impression of an old world building, but we do have images of it being built, although there's some issues from that. It's hard to say what this really is. Is this a reality breakdown? Is it a glitch in the matrix? Is it a simulation error? Or is it a sign that the current civilization could build like the previous civilization? It's one of the very few that it's a little hard to explain. Now, have I actually gone there in person and assessed the materials or anything like that? No. I have a feeling if I did, I'd get the real answer because usually that's what it takes. Oh yeah, Eastern style, beyond any shadow of a doubt. Yes, it does, doesn't it? Right down to the whole concept of reading is believing. Time seemed to be invented after the last reset when they started recording history here. Yeah, that could be very true, Chassis. And filling it in the meantime as well. Yeah, it's funny. They call it, in the film, they called it a Byzantine church. But, is there really any difference? I don't know. True. And there's a lot of calendar changes along with that as well. I suspect, Heidi, because two reasons. One, they wanted to either keep them as trophies and repurpose them. It was easier. Not that they needed to do that. Or two, they could not tear them down. They lacked the ability to tear them down. But again, those are just theories. But I definitely lean towards they just simply couldn't tear them down. Like the Iowa State Capitol, the Florence Cathedral. How do you go about tearing something like that down? Or the more well-known example, the courthouse in Philadelphia. Yeah, I'd bankrupt the city to tear this baby down. So anyways, let me get that banner out of there. But moving on. And then, of course, you recall one of my other favorites, the Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis. And this is one of those deceptive buildings because you look at it in this image and you don't think it's large. And I mean, this thing is gargantuan. It compares to the largest cathedrals in Europe. It's an incredible structure. Now, oddly enough, I've had some people who've tried to subvert explorations on it by, well, don't pay attention to the exterior. There's nothing amazing about the exterior. This is St. Louis, and maybe as part of historical revisionism, not only will they say that St. Louis made a lot of bricks and shipped them all over the place, they made a lot of domes and shipped them all over the place. They made a lot of columns and shipped them all over the place. It's well documented, even though it doesn't make any sense. But I really appreciated this structure. And then the interior on it, where they try to get people to focus on the interior by saying it's got one of the largest mosaics outside of Russia. Yeah, Russia has structures with larger mosaics, but it almost feels to me like the mosaics in here are a bit of a distraction, as though they're trying to get you to not pay attention to how unbelievable this building is on the exterior, built in the early 1900s, of course, because when else would it be? And, just focus on the cool mosaic. But that's just my read on the situation. Maybe you think it's the greatest mosaic in the world, and that's totally fine with me. but just something else to think about. And then, of course, the Iowa State Capitol, building that doesn't really make any sense, that defies all logical explanation, a state that built it with funds that were refunded to it from the Civil War because somehow it coughed up 48 regiments, even though it had only been a state for a few years prior to the Civil War. Minnesota's even more bizarre, but it's one of many examples. And I like this early image of the Iowa State Capitol where it's just kind of sitting out there in the wilderness and people are just moseying up to it. You have to wonder if there's actually a lot of truth to this, if this is how it looked when it was originally, founded. Sorry, I had to go there. Yeah, exactly. And they're all palaces, really. Yeah, the other White House. Mud flooded windows. Oh, yeah. And I mean, it checks all the blocks. All of them do. What's this comment here, Donna Marie? There are 3 giant old world churches in Philly on Frankfort Avenue in Armingo, about 5 blocks from Kensington. Can't miss the differences with the nearby new churches. Oh, so true. And isn't it nice when they park them right next to each other and it makes it real obvious? And for whatever reason, they do that. So, good question. How do you build dome roofs at any point in time? We're really struggling with that these days. Any ideas on the amount of time that transpired in between the cataclysm and the founding? No idea. I've got several theories on it, 76 mark, and I'll spew a couple of them in explorations. I mean, I don't really know. And honestly, as I've gone on with more explorations, I'm getting less and less confident of the actual unfolding of years in the 1900s. Yeah, I mean, it's getting that rough for me. So, as always, make of it what you will. And then, of course, one of my favorite altered images where, they dramatize the fire in the Iowa State Capitol. Oh, yeah, it's a little lovely image. And I actually saw the schlocky paper they had this printed on when I went there. So, again, make of it what you will. So, back to the question, why do we still have these buildings? Because they couldn't destroy them. They lacked the means to destroy them. Oh, yeah. Well, and, Vaughn, when you go in the Iowa State Capitol, you also see a very peculiar pattern that you might have seen on several of the explorations in the walls. I'm not going to say what that symbol is. I can't, but you know what symbol it is. Yeah, it's always a fire marine. Exactly, Jamie, and I think that's what I'm really finding out. I mean, just how fluid the timeline really seems to be and how messed up things actually are. Oh, yeah, beyond any shadow of a doubt. And for example, one of the reasons like a city like Dubuque, Iowa attracts my attention is it's essentially an entire old world city that's very well intact. I mean, a lot survived there. I mean, you go there and you probably have a really good idea of what the old world looks like. You go to Dubuque, Iowa. Yeah, Detroit was a miracle town. And they really smashed a lot of Detroit in 1960 with the urban renewal. But that was continuing long after that. And they're still continuing that to this day. Oh, yes. And, Fairy Girl, there's a reason why I posited that, Vienna might have been one of the candidates for one of the capitals or one of the regional forums of the previous civilization. I think there's a great argument for that. I mean, even more so in some ways than Rome because of some of the stuff that's intact in Vienna. It's very incredible. It was one of my favorite explorations. And then, of course, some of the imagery that we have of what it may have looked like. So when you put all this together and then you put the technological component that we know is lacking, you suddenly get different kind of images. Now, these images might be close. They might be completely wrong. But I do appreciate the attempt to visualize and give an idea of what it may have looked like. Of course, you remember this image from Inception, but this is Paris or Paris, of course, where the Olympics are occurring now, coincidentally, another coincidence. And you'll find all kinds of old world architecture there as well that people just walk through and buy every day. This is one of my favorite ones because you get a little bit of everything here. And you also get a sign of things starting to deteriorate in this image. You got a couple domes, you got several pyramids, obelisk structures. Could it have gone this far? Absolutely. Who knows how far they went? And who knows what really happened in the reset? Plasma fire, mud flood, cymatic weapon turned against the civilization. All kinds of possibilities. Some things more destroyed than others. Or maybe there's a reason why Vienna survived intact, or certain towns did. We just don't know what that reason is. I think this is one of my very favorite ones because I think this gives you an idea of just how far things could have gone. Of course, people say, it's just science fiction. Yeah, well, there's a reason why science fiction resonates with these explorations too, isn't there? Death ray, maybe. Or maybe it was just some sort of power source. Or some sort of reinvigoration beam, if you will. Because remember, we believe that the civilization was also about caring for the welfare of individuals. Yeah, true. What goes up must come down, and what goes down must come up. Hey, Sissy, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Oh, it could be. That's a good way to look at it, Vaughn. Hey, Crypto, good to see you, buddy. Yeah, atmospheric electricity harvesting. And probably a more advanced form of it. And that's why I like these conceptualized artwork, because it gives you an idea of what things could have looked like, what they could have been like. So anyway, that's the last image that I've had, but prior to ending this exploration, there is one other thing I wanted to take a look at, and some of you have requested to see what are some of the best explorations, or what at least have been some of my favorites. You know, I know everybody's got a little bit of their own favorite, or what really shows what we're getting at with these theories. So, old world looking sun shining directly into my desk. Yeah, yep. Well, I appreciate that. So let's take a look at what some of the most revealing explorations have been since we started the channel. So give me 1 second here. Stop screen. And here we go. So the very original palace in the heartland, the big inside look I did of the Iowa State Capitol, one of the very first explorations on the channel, and one of the very few building-focused explorations I do, because typically when I'm on the ground, I like to look at the entire city. There's all kinds of old world structures. That's just sort of how I fell into things. But you can look at this as the baseline comparison for all of the structures that we look at in the land, the Iowa State Capitol. Building number one, at least for this channel's explorations. Although those of you who've been around, or those of you who are members, you know that the original building number one was going to be Florence Cathedral. But for a lot of reasons, that didn't work out. So there's that exploration, if you haven't seen it. Yeah, that's right, Atom Bomb. See, I can admit my bias, okay? I can admit my bias. But, you know, if you have the means, go see the Iowa State Capitol. If you're just wheeling through Iowa, because it's free to go in there. It's easy to go in there. It doesn't matter whether it's winter or it's summer. It's always perfectly climate controlled because they got that incredible HVAC system in there. And you'll see a genuine old world building. How else do you explain it? Scientists are baffled. Yeah, exactly. Anyways, so another exploration, the orphan trains exploration. And this is actually where I looked into a little bit of my family history on this one, especially with my great-grandfather and his unfortunate fate, and the concepts of diaspora and dysphoria, and how that's constantly inflicted on the population even to this day. And then, of course, the date paradox. So another good exploration to watch. So definitely check that one out, where we explore and look at the different concepts of dates, talking about tombstones, how reliable are they? And then, of course, that good old J figure that factors in there. What's it mean? Well, it's 4 digits. It's just now we have an alphanumeric designation instead of just a numeric designation. So bottom line up front, you're confused. Is it year 2023, 24? Is it year 7? I don't know. But good one right there. Tartaria, what was it really like? And this was the first exploration that looked at things before the reset, what it may have looked like. Because, you know, a lot of people have ideas, but what could the entire civilization have looked like when it was at the peak of its functionality? What did it really achieve? And what kind of ideas does it give us when we look at it? Told my friend's son to go look at the Iowa State Capitol and tell us what he thinks about it. Yep. So anyway, 1 sec. Sorry about that, but yeah, wagons, donkeys, and horses. That's always a good one there, Heidi. Would have never thought Iowa was so full of old world structures. Nope, or Oklahoma or Texas. They're all over the place. I think the reason I like to look at Iowa, though, is it fits perfectly with its whole Civil War involvement, too, Sooner West, because that really doesn't make a lot of sense. The true fanatical state of the Union is the one that just became a state not too long before the Civil War. Sends 48 regiments to go fight. And, according to the official narrative of the Civil War, the official account, the war was won by the Union in the West before it was won in the East. So, all very interesting. Exactly, Donna Marie. It doesn't. It really doesn't. So, last ones here. St. Louis, and this is the Rome of the West. So I did 2 explorations of St. Louis. This is the one where I really got on the ground and looked at things, and a lot of interesting anomalies in St. Louis. And I've gotten no shortage of comments about this one of, well, you live in the city. Okay, yeah, it's great you live in the city. Did you witness any of this actually happening? No, because you weren't alive in 1899. I know that for a fact. There's no first-hand accounts from 1899. So you didn't really see any of this. Nobody can even tell you about the building of the St. Louis Cathedral. They'll just tell you, pay attention to the mosaic. Don't pay attention to the incredible structure on the outside that's colossal. Look at the mosaic. Yeah, sure. Look at whatever you want to and appreciate whatever you want to. And then let's not forget those wonderful standpipe water towers they have. 3 lovely ones that survived in St. Louis. One a giant column, the Grand Avenue water tower. And all the other cool structures that are there. St. Petersburg in Russia. And for whatever reason, St. Petersburg is another one of those very intact core cities, as I called it, at the time during the exploration from Tartaria, much in the same way that Vienna is. You can see a lot of examples there. Now, of course, people try to run this down with the whole, well, you're just highlighting one nation. No, it's every nation. Every nation has its own example of old world architecture. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the only one around my neighborhood that sees how quickly they cover up bricks coming through the asphalt. Yeah, probably. And they do move fast on that nowadays, don't they? Yeah, Prague was another fun one too, Donna Marie. Some of those cities, for whatever reason, they just managed to endure. And maybe there was a reason for that. Maybe the way they facilitated the last reset, that's why they kept things intact. What was the light bulb moment? Actually, it was going around the university and asking questions about the old main building at the university I worked at the time. And I didn't like the answer I got, so I kept asking more questions. So, now I'm a little reluctant to feature member content because I don't like to push membership on the channel, but some of the videos that I do, and I do them for the members because they support me, and it's a little extra work that I do to say thank you to the members. Fields of Void was a really good exploration that looked at some traditional and folklore accounts and really gave an idea of how things could have been very different, especially in a certain area of the country. Again, it's Iowa. Yeah, I focus a lot on Iowa. There's a reason for that. There was something going on there. And there's several accounts of things very dramatic, such as the sun being blocked out for an entire year. There's an entire account of an entire group of people disappearing from the town of Dyersville. And there's even accounts of portals being opened and all kinds of crazy things. Now, could it all be embellished? Sure. Could it just be the random stories made up by people who were not known to employ their imaginations and creativity? Yeah, you could say so. But it all factors together very nice. So these are some of my favorite explorations, and I think it's really brought the channel a long way, and we still have a long way to go. Yes. All meet in Iowa. Well, just watch. I'll probably move on from Iowa by that time. I've started to move on to some other areas, but the reason that I liked looking into Dubuque so much in the area around there, especially Dyersville, is that Cathedral Basilica in Dyersville makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. And then, of course, they plop the Field of Dreams there. They just arbitrarily select Dyersville. That's where they're going to build the Field of Dreams. So, anyway. Yep, it's a good one. So, in any event, I hope everyone enjoyed and appreciated this Old World Tartaria unified theory, and it really gives you an idea of how we do business on the channel. Well, maybe that's not the best way to say it, but how we go about doing explorations. Oh yeah, they got a pretty one in Madison, no doubt about it. And another lots of fire story there too in that little isthmus between the lakes. If you come to St. Louis, stay away from the North City County area. Rather dark in those parts. That's okay. I already tromped through there. So I made it. But I appreciate it. Well, thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you, Donna. And I'm glad to see everybody's enjoying the chat too. So yeah, it might well be. Well, thank you everybody for being here, and I hope you enjoy your week. I'm gonna catch up a few things before the end of the month. There's a couple things I need to re-release. We lost a live stream, so I'm gonna get that back out in the next couple days. And a couple other things. I'll just let me know in the comments what video you can't find. Oh. Well, the Fields of Void was one for the Prime Fairy Girl. This is for Prime Explorer, so. Crew, yep. Well, I greatly appreciate it, everyone. All right. Well, everybody, you have a great week, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next live stream. And we got a whole slew of fresh explorations coming out in August. I've got the schedule filled. So, anyways, hope you all have a great week, and thank you for joining me. And most importantly, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your ideas. I mean, that's what means the most to me. So, what on the ground is coming up? Oh, you have to ask me that, don't you, my bailiwick zone? I don't know. Might have something to do with Florida. All right, everybody. Have a great week.